picture of how a very lively setting is using assessment and what it's for, making it work. So we've had a great introduction to thinking about what it's all about. But I wanted to call this Keeping Our Eye on What Really Counts, because I know how busy you are. And there are so many things all of the time that can distract you. You're probably no one in this room as old as I am, possibly. So you might not have grown up with the same books that I did. One I grew up with and then also shared with my children was Dr. Seuss, Cat in a Hat. Do you still use Cat in a Hat? Yep. Good old Dr. Seuss. Well, this is a really anarchic story about this outrageous cat that comes to the house when the parents are out. Of course, you'd never do that these days. You know, not at all safe. And he wreaks havoc in the house. And there is a bit in it that says this: look at me, look at me, look at me now. It's fun to have fun, but you have to know how. I can hold up the cup and the milk and the cake. I can hold up the books, etc. And of course, it all gets totally out of hand and collapses down. But when I looked at that, I thought, oh yeah, that's really like you, isn't it? Look at you now. Look at all the things that you're juggling all the time. You know, it's a huge job being an early years practitioner. And this is the sort of thing that I'm always talking to people who don't understand how skilled your work is, don't understand the range of things that you're juggling with every day. Because of that, sometimes you're pulled this way and that, and what's the latest kind of crisis, or what do I need to get to grips with? We can lose sight of why we're really doing this anyway, if we're not careful. You might know about the EPSI research, which is one of the English examples of research that shows what happens with children when they're 3, 4 years old, has an effect all the way through to when they started the study, which was the end of Key Stage 3. And they found it makes a difference in so many aspects: their attainment, their approach to learning, their self-regulation. And there are other studies in other parts of the world that have followed people well into adulthood that show what happened when they were 3. What was the quality of the setting? What did they experience? And you can map it. So I think it really gives credit to the work that you do to know that what you do can make a difference for children their whole lives. Yeah, that's exciting, isn't it? Also a bit scary, maybe. But I think it's important to sometimes try to find our way through, you know, can't see the wood for the trees, can't see the trees that count because we're surrounded. So sometimes it's good to stop and say, well, what is it that really matters? If these children are going to move on from working with me and go onward in their life, and something that I'm supporting them with is going to matter forever for them, what is it? So I want you to just have a word with somebody next to you. We're just going to have 1 minute for this, because these are things you really know, what you believe in, and say, okay, when they leave me, what are the 2 or 3 things that I really want to make sure they go forward with? Okay? 1 minute, over to you. Okay, let's stop there. And let's just take a quick straw poll about what some of these things were. Heard a few odd words here and there that gave me flavor. If something that you said, you would say fits in the EYFS in the area of PSED, put your hands up. Yeah, lots, PSED. Anyone talk about communication and language, expressing themselves? You? Anyone say anything about physical development? Healthy, active, using their bodies, etc. Anyone say anything that would be the characteristics of effective learning? You? Okay. Anyone say anything to do with literacy? 1. Maths? No. What about the other areas? Understanding the world, couple, and expressive arts and design? Not one. Okay, so I would say the majority there are PSED. The next most probably characteristics, and then we moved on to communication and language, probably more. Well, when I ask people this a lot, some of the things that they often say are these. Because what I'm asking you about is, what are your values? What do you want for children? This was one I did with a group and we flip charted it, and I would say all of those really are in the characteristics of effective learning. But that's probably because we've been talking about that. When it comes down to saying what really matters, we need to keep it in our mind, or else we can be distorting our assessment and spending more time on the things that maybe aren't what matter the most. Chris Pascal and Tony Bertram said this a few years ago. We need to ensure that what we're measuring truly matters. And we're not simply focusing on things that are easily measured. It's a trap to fall into, isn't it? Some things are hard to capture, and others aren't. Well, the research does show us that the things that matter most are some core areas for young children. And first and foremost, well, not first. First I put PSED, we'll come to that in a minute, as a prime area, and look at why. But also, the characteristics of effective learning. Why are they so important? Well, because they are the way that the child is reaching out into the world, seeking experience, thinking about their experience, having the push to get out there and learn and do. And the EYFS tells us in a little short paragraph, which is actually really powerful. It says, as we plan, so that means when we're setting up our environment, thinking about opportunities, all of that. So as we organize what we're offering to children and guiding them, the way that we interact, we must, and that's the legal requirement word, we must keep these in mind all the time and reflect them in the way that we work with children, because they are fundamental. Okay, and we've got those three characteristics. What it's talking about is the child being the active agent of their own learning. We often say to people, you can't do learning for any of your children. They have to be the ones who do it. You can be alongside and support and stimulate, but the learning power resides in the child, and we've got to keep that strong and keep it building. So yeah, these are some of the ideas. We're after the growth mindset. I can do things if I try. And self-regulation, which more and more we're realizing makes that lifetime difference. How much you're in charge of your own activities and your own learning. Okay, then we have the prime areas. So a lot of you said things in PSED you felt were some of the most important things you'd want to go forward. And the other two areas as well. Well, PSED, I would say, is first and foremost because it's a basic need for children to feel safe, to feel cared for, to belong. And if they don't have that, then whatever else you're offering them might as well just go out the window, because they've got, even in their brain, to not have those stress hormones firing off that stop them thinking, stop them learning. First of all comes that feeling of being attached and safe. Yeah. And then physical development, prime, because children learn through their bodies, using their senses, doing things, exploring the world around them. And as their physical capacities develop, they can engage in more and more ways. And communication and language. Well, I could say a lot about that. It's a really important area that I do a lot of work in, but no time this morning. But I hope you know how critical it is for all future learning, because we learn through talking with other people. Why are these called prime? Because when we are born, our brains are looking for those. They're looking for the experiences that we're going to wire up that brain really quickly. These are part of child development. We have this sensitive period in early childhood where a few experiences will help us to build those capacities. So all children, wherever you live, all through history, have cared about other people and their feelings and how do I manage it and what's expected of me, are learning about the whole PSED part. And they're learning about their bodies and using them, and they're learning to communicate. And what we know is if we don't get that right as a foundation early on, it's much harder to deal with later. So if you don't have an early good attachment relationship, then that has knock-on effects and it's harder in your later life. If you don't develop early movement patterns, you end up with difficulties, links of dyslexia, for instance, to lack of early movement patterns and so on. And communication language, much, much harder to learn a language later in your life than it is early on. So we need to get them right, and children are wide open for those in a way that they won't be later. The specific areas, on the other hand, our brain is not looking for them. They're not part of human nature. They're part of our human culture that we have invented and that we share with children. And they are not time sensitive. So if we don't get the prime areas right, those children are going to struggle. But actually, it doesn't matter if you don't learn to read until you're 7. Why start at 4? It doesn't matter. Other parts of the world, they don't start as early as we do here, and they do just as well by the time they're 9 or 11. These are things that we learn through experience, but our brain doesn't have a particular preference for when, and we can do that later. But we do have a responsibility to gradually share all of those cultural tools with children. But always remember that these are always on the go. I would say you cannot do a maths activity without the child having a feeling about it, and about me and you and what's going on, and also using their bodies, because children are in their bodies. Are they comfortable? Can they move things? And they need the communication about it. So you can never just do maths. The prime areas are always there. So they're always on the go because they're part of child development. And we gradually spread out into the specific areas as well. How does this fit with the characteristics of effective learning? Well, I would say that the characteristics of effective learning are the spokes of the wheel. They are what drives the learning. Because if the child is not doing those things, then they're not going to learn. They're going to be sitting there passive, not taking things in, not prepared to try something new, not thinking about it, to make the links that they need to do. So they are the essential drivers. Always, always there. Yeah? Okay, this is in Development Matters. You probably know about the themes of the EYFS. And when Helen Moylet and I did the revision for the 2012 the Development Matters material, we thought, we have these themes, but they link together in quite a specific way. The child brings who they are, including their learning powers and their drives, and their individual temperament and characteristics. And then it depends what they meet in the relationships. What kind of relationships and interactions will they experience? What kind of activities, materials will they explore in their environment? And that feeds into the learning and development. So we can't ever just look at the child and assess how's the child doing if we don't take into account, well, what opportunities have they had? What kind of relationships, what kind of environments? Yeah? So it's actually, we try to simplify that big juggling job you've got to something that's easy to remember what counts. So what counts is the child and the strength of those characteristics of effective learning. And what counts is what you're doing here. And when I talk about your 2 toolboxes, so whenever we're assessing something that's going on, we can think, how do I need to be with this child? What's my interaction to be like? And what do I need to offer in terms of experiences? To keep it in a very quick kind of a rule of thumb. Okay, so assessment. We also have this in the EYFS. And that's, again, the legal requirement at the top. It talks about ongoing assessment, formative assessment. And the purpose of that is that we do something about it for the benefit of the child. So assessment, just to keep a record, is a huge waste of your very valuable time. Just to, have a record of what's happened. It's only useful if we are shaping the learning experiences because of it. So we start here, I've got a little arrow, yes. We actually really tune in and notice what's going on, the detail. And then we assess. Now, to me, assessment does not mean finding a level and matching it to one of the development matter statements or whatever. It means for you to say, what did that mean when I saw that child do that? And the question I would always want to have in my mind is, how do I get to know this child better? Who is this child? What are they thinking? How do they feel? What do they care about? That's your assessment. And you might or might not link it to an EYFS kind of strand. But it's really, the real assessment question is, do I get it? Do I get what's going on? The question in the child's mind, their purpose, etc. So that's where you're actually creative and also intuitive. And you think, what's going on here? And then you do your planning, the what next. And I would say there, always think about your two toolboxes, the planning, the interaction, and the experience. So it's always round that whole cycle. We have principles of early years assessment, and it is based on ongoing over time. So we don't just do a one-off, sit down, I'll give you a test for 20 minutes and know everything about you, which sadly the government is planning to do with the baseline assessment for all children entering reception class. Think of how much time and attention it takes you to get to know a child. And they think they can sit them down for 20 minutes. Not at all what we would want for these young children. So, across time, should always really include those prime areas, because they're always there and are the most fundamental, and the characteristics. So those two, we know, are the power that you have to give children things that will carry them forward successfully through their lives. So always involved and aware of them, and also that people who know the child well, so the key person and other people who interact with the child regularly, and parents. So it's great to hear about parents feeding into the profiles. But this last one can be challenging. Reflect the uniqueness of every child, who learn differently. It's not going to look the same for every child. So we'll look a bit more at that. Okay, ways of looking. This comes from a painting. I'll show you the whole painting in a minute and see if you can find where that is. This is looking really closely. And when you're with a child in an activity, it's just that one moment or that 5 minutes, and it's in a particular context, and you're looking closely at what they do and what they say. So you're getting a lot of detail, aren't you? And it might be with your interaction at the same time. You use that to go around that cycle. Your short-term planning. You think, I see this, and now I can think, what does it mean? And so what am I going to do in this interaction right now? You may record it, probably not. Occasionally, as Tom said, you have a system to make sure that you get a pattern of recorded observations, but I would say to you that you do hundreds a day. Hundreds and hundreds of observations a day. And you don't write most of them down. You're clocking it, aren't you? You hold it in your head as you get to know that child. Okay, so we're looking in a lot of detail and saying, I see there's some dark color here and little white bits. And we're not trying as we're observing, not to jump to conclusions. We're trying to really look accurately. And we also, I think it's important to look holistically. So let's say I have this photograph, and we'd immediately, in order to know anything about what was happening for this child, need more than just a photograph, wouldn't we? So it could be that he ran over to the table where there were some paints out and someone had already mixed up them, and he put his hands in and held them up and then ran off and didn't even say anything and just had a laugh. Or it could be that he said, I want to go and do the painting, and I'm going to use all the colors. And he went over and he did one color and another color. He spent a good 15 minutes exploring all, and then said, look, I've made purple. That's a really different experience, isn't it? So we need a lot more than just a photo. But let's take that second case. Let's say the child did that. Well, was he doing all those things? He certainly was doing all of those characteristics. He was exploring with his senses, exploring the colors and the textures. He was motivated. He said, I'm going to do it, and he stayed and concentrated. And he was thinking about it and saying, look what I've made. He was making sense of his experience there. And, you would see that whether he was engaging with others, his confidence to do it, etc. He talked about it, his use of his hands. And I don't know, maybe some of those were there and some of those, maybe they weren't. But you would almost always have those characteristics and primaries, and maybe the others. Okay, well, this is just to reinforce that when we talk about doing that assessment cycle, it's not just when you have recorded your observation, but that you do it all the time. And your most powerful planning and your most powerful next step is right then and there. Because, you can choose, okay, this is a next step for this child for the next few weeks. Well, that's just one tiny bit of their learning, isn't it? An identified next step. They're not just going to learn that in the next weeks. They're learning every area all the time. And so in a way, you might have an overarching, okay, this is something that we're hoping this child, or thinking this, we can support this child to move on to. But that is one of hundreds. And as you work and play with children, you'll be spotting right now and over. It might be a next step that means we're going to move on in a progression. Now, see, they're doing this, they're really confident, so I'm going to give them a new challenge. It might be the next step is they need to experience that in different contexts to get really confident about it. So it could be staying where you are, but experiencing it, embedding it. It doesn't necessarily mean moving on. When you are working with the child and you make the decision that now it's time for me to say something, or now it's time for me to pick that brick up and hold it so they can balance it, those decisions, you have done that round the cycle. And those, minute by minute, is where the learning happens, and the most powerful assessment that you do. Okay, then occasionally, boom, you'll stand back, and you'll see the whole picture. So where was that bit? I think it was part of this. Yeah? So one little moment of a child's experience, it's actually part of a much bigger picture. And there, that's where you are looking at, okay, I've got all these thousands of observations on every child, some of them written down, most of them not, but I know it. And then it's time to step back and say, so where are we now? What does it all look like? And that's when you will, look at the overall level, as we've seen Tom showed us, making assessments across all the areas of learning. And you can then look at progress over time. Why do you do it? Well, just like the close-up looking, it has to have a purpose. We don't want to waste your valuable time by doing something that isn't going to lead to anything else. So short-term planning that leads to what you're going to do right now, or maybe tomorrow. But this kind of assessment also needs to lead to something. It can inform how you're going to plan for the environment. If you say, oh, you know, this child or a group of children are not making progress as I would think they could if I changed what I'm doing. So you can change the way you're working. It's also to share, to pass on, to share with parents, etc. And to understand what kind of progression is happening. Something should come from it. So you gather all that progress information. That's your day-to-day, moment-to-moment, some of it written down, great majority of it not written down. You need information from parents, anyone else that knows the child themselves. What are they telling you they like to do and they find challenging or hard or that they really enjoy? Maybe other professionals if they're involved. So you got all these sources of information, and then once in a while you summarize it and you analyze it. And again, you need to use it for something or there's no point. So to affect your provision or the way that you're practicing, and just, you know, to understand children's progress and be able to share that with other people who need to know. Make the most of it. Supporting transitions is an important reason to say overall this is where that child is. And to make sure we're not missing those invisible children who are the ones who are just chuntering along nicely. Make sure that all children are moving on. How do we do it? Well, this is also what it says in the law. It says, it's a pretty strong statement. Assessment should not entail prolonged breaks from interaction nor require excessive paperwork. It should be limited to that which is absolutely necessary to promote children's successful learning and development. They are looking at revising some elements of the EYFS at the moment, and they've tried to make that statement even stronger to say that no one should ever ask you for evidence that's written down. That you should, what you hold in your head is evidence. And it's hard to get away from. But I think that only what is necessary to promote their learning and development. Not to evidence it, not to prove that we did it, not to, you know, meet somebody else's standard, but only if we used it. I need to write that down because I want to share that with the parents so they'll be able to understand and work with this. I need to write that down because I want to look at it later with the child so we can have a really great review and conversation, and the child can feel proud about what they did or whatever, and have a learning conversation. Or I better write that down because I might forget it. That's a good reason too. Okay, now what quality of recording? This is, a lot of people still use these, although more and more people are going on to electronic systems. But look at this observation. Somebody took a picture and wrote that. Dan enjoyed playing the sound today with his friends. I'm learning to make friends. Well, do you think Dan really said that? No. I still find people put in quotes things that they think are, you know, as if they're speaking for the child. And Dan didn't say that. That's the adult's assessment. And it also says Dan enjoyed playing. How do you know he enjoyed? That's an assessment. That's not an observation. The whole thing is an assessment without any evidence, really. If he enjoyed it, does that mean, you know, that he just stayed there for a long time silently and you were assuming he enjoyed it because he was concentrating? Or you could say, Dan chose to go to this sand and played really energetically for however long he did, put some of his own language, and then that tells us something, whereas enjoyed does not. And what did he do with the other children? What kind of interaction was there? Is he parallel playing, or did they do something together? need the detail, don't you? That's not helpful. So the quality of observation that gives you real information about what happened and what the child said. We also have to be careful, even if we're not writing it down, but using much handier systems like family and the use that we've had described to us. We still need to keep it at a minimum so that we're not watching everything through the tablet and not being with the children. Yeah? We don't want to be distorted away from interacting. And this question, does the device frame the way we see the children? You know, are we seeing everything that we're too busy looking at there and thinking about what objectives we might tick off? Okay, so we come to ticking things off. Development matters. You're probably familiar with all the statements, whether in this format or another, and that it runs from birth through to the end of the EYFS. Development Matters was put together for a few reasons. One, to give guidance around typical child development progression. So it gives some support for you to think, you know, roughly where are children going and what are they likely to be doing. And also to support that periodic stepping back and say, well, am I more or less on track here? Yeah, it's for that as well. But what it is not is a tick list. And I'd urge you to be very, very careful about that. When we were putting this together, we were told it had to be slim. You know, we didn't want tomes of child development. And you could have had umpteen statements in each band, couldn't you? And so it's a sample. It's a sample of possible things. It's not everything. And you will see so many things children do. And if you want to go and find a statement, you'll go, oh, I can't see it. Well, because it can't be there. That's why your assessment counts. So when you write what you see, write your observation and then what you think that means in terms of what they're showing you. Don't worry if it's not there, okay? There are, even with that tiny sample, about 570 of them. And if we expect every child to do 570, that becomes a big kind of recording task in itself, doesn't it? To make sure we've got all of those. Well, when we were putting it together, we had a big team of advisors that covered all kinds of expertise across early years development. And some people were very concerned about making a list at all because they said people will use it as a checklist and assume every child has to do it. So we put this in the actual printed copy of Development Matters. It's on every single page, across the bottom of the page. It says children are different. The statements and their order shouldn't be taken as necessary steps for an individual child, individual children. They don't have to do all those. They don't have to do them in that order. They might have one from another band and then that one, and you can't say, oh, they missed one, it's a gap, we have to go back and do that. Not necessarily. They might be doing other things. Yeah? They should not be used as checklists. And we also, as you know, will have the overlapping age stage bands. They're not fixed age boundaries. You're this age, so you should be doing that. And they're meant to suggest a typical range, but not a prescribed set of things. So why do we not want a checklist? Well, if we had a checklist approach, and we had a list of things that children are beginning to do, and we're gradually ticking them off, yep, and do that, and do that, we don't have a picture of a unique child. What we end up is the identikit child, as if they're all the same. They're all developing in exactly the same pattern. And that comes from this view of learning. That, okay, we have 3 prime areas, we have 4 specific areas, and they just, you know, we track them down in a linear way. And we expect them to do that. Well, if we did, actually your job would be a lot easier. because you could say, okay, here they are, I know what exactly the next step is, and actually I know where they're likely to be in 6 months, so I can plan the whole year ahead. Well, developmental psychologists who really look in detail at learning processes say, sorry, Doesn't work like that at all. It looks more like that. Okay. It's different for every child. And things will stop and start. Because if they, you're here, let's say you're right here, and you'd say, okay, coming down, there's the next step. Well, not in this case, because maybe I learned something, but actually I'm really busy now doing this. And so I'm just going to back up to a little more comfortable things there that I don't even have to think about. So you'll go backwards, you'll plateau, you'll make sudden gains. And they all interweave with each other as well, that holistic view. They're not separate, predictable strands. So that's more what it looks like. So we want to gather the picture of where those children all are, not as if we're tracking them down the line. Think of it like this. Here you are at this side of the field, and the children are going to run across to the trees. And this is the course of your year, for instance, or 2 or 3 years. They're all going to go across there. And you want to get a picture of how are they doing that? Well, they're all different. So here's one with his ball. He's a very active child. He explores through his body and is finding out about things that way. This one's much more wants the facts and the information and to have conversation and look things up. This one likes to look at things from different perspectives. Very creative sort of child. This one, exploring the breeze and feeling the sensory side of that. For them, the main thing is my friends and doing things together, and I'm learning about being with others. And this one, I'm not sure I like that field. I'm not sure I want to go in there anyway. And this one, I'm going for it. So all kinds of different ways. And they will all be doing their track across here in their own way. If we have our mind on those statements, we end up missing all that. Because we're only noticing what's happening here. And if we see somebody coming a bit close, we'll grab them over and say, that's your next step. Well, they don't have to go on that step. They can go across another way. Yeah? Okay, so then how, if you're detailing in your mind, as well as sometimes in a recording, those individual pictures, how each child is doing things in a different way at a different time, how then can you do a summative assessment, that step back periodic? Because they're all so different. Well, that's where the best fit judgment comes in. Let's say these children are all the same age, roughly, 3.5, 4, and you're going to do your termly assessment, and you think, well, they're so different. How can I give a picture of the kind of progress they're making? Well, that's where we have the bands. And we would say this middle band is roughly where they are for their age. And you can see that the majority of them are more or less in there. Some of them, like this one, isn't really. And this one is just really getting going there. And others are clearly beyond. We don't need to check every statement to see that. We need to read the thing as a whole and say, does this band describe them better than that one or that one? Yeah? It's not about a numerical ticking off. It's, does that feel more like where they are? And that's enough. Yeah? So I wouldn't be doing sort of data at that point of how many targets have they ticked off. That's not what it's about. But then you can see that they're gradually, although in a wiggly way, working their way down and making progress. I think the idea of having the developing or secure is helpful because this one is quite different from that one, isn't it? Yeah? So that gives you a sense of how well it describes them in that band, but not as a numerical thing. Now this, I would wish we could do that all the time. We talked to the government about doing that because when we did the kind of development progression, they said, we want to know what's expected of children at every age. And we were saying, it's not expected. They're all different. What we will give you is what's typical. And keep that in mind. It's typical, but it's not an expectation that they need to be there. Okay. So, EYFS gives us a lot of support for doing a good job with the whole range of responsibilities we have, gives us those principles, and that it's based around play, which is the best place for you to really have time to be there and see and observe what children can really do. And I would urge you to try to simplify all those juggling balls and just keep in your mind this picture. Whatever is going on, any minute when you're around children, you've got a couple of things to balance. You've got to think, okay, what do I see of these characteristics? Really raise the focus of that, because those are the things that build learners for life. And what about these prime areas that we're called the foundation stage for a reason? Those are the things we need the foundation in. So how are they here? You also will pick up specific things, but really keep your prime focus there. And then the next step, it's not necessarily the next step for the child. It's the next step for me as the person who's providing with my toolboxes. What's the next step in terms of how I engage them, how I interact, how I support them? What kind of conversations are we going to have? And the environment. So that's my attempt to give you a little simpler picture than all of the things that I need to keep in mind all the time. Okay,